What's on, guys? J-Hoy back with you today. Welcome back to NHL 22. We are back here on Online Versus, and we got some good gameplays for you in the background as absolute domination was bestowed upon these two opponents. So we end up using, of course, the Vegas Golden Knights, which is going to be the topic of today's video. So this team is out of the playoffs for the first time ever in Vegas history, of course only being a few years old. They are now out. They no longer have a chance to make the playoffs, and it sucks. It really does, because they had such high expectations, being the first expansion franchise in a long time. They did so good right out the gate. 4 or 5 years of playoffs, and now here we are. They are out. So if you look at the standings, of course, well, before we get into that, so this video is kind of going to be an overlook on the season, how they did standings-wise, a look at next year, who they should keep, who they should trade, who to re-sign, potential, acquisitions into the team, and of course, who underperformed or who, what kind of exactly caused them to fail this year. So let's start with, where did they finish overall? So I don't remember where they finished total overall in the Western Conference, but they missed out on the playoffs just outside the wild card by, well, they have one game left, but basically 4, maybe 6 points, depending on how the games go tonight. But 92 points on the year total. Like I said, they have one more game to play, and if I remember correctly, they actually play, they played tonight at 8, so probably a couple days ago for you guys, and this will go out after the season is over, most likely. But 81 games played so far, 42 wins, it's pretty good there. 31 losses, 8 overtime losses, like I said, 92 points. Home record 22-15-4, away record 20-16-4. Goals for 259, goals against 244. That's a positive goal differential of 15, and the last 10 has not been good to them. 3-3-4 on a 3-game losing streak. So they were a good team, but just couldn't get there in the end. And they were close. Like I said, they were very close. If they would have won the game versus Dallas, then we'd be going into tonight with a pretty interesting story. But like I said, they are out of the playoffs. They were ahead of Vancouver, Winnipeg, San Jose, Anaheim, Chicago, Seattle, and Arizona in the wild card. And then, of course, we have our playoff matchups going on as well. Those are still being determined. But now, that was the team stats. But let's jump over to the player stats. So, something that was very interesting through this entire year was somebody you wouldn't really expect to be your team leader in points. Actually, we have a two-way tie for the team leader in points. You have Jonathan Marchessault, which you kind of expected to be up there in like the top 3, top 4 in scoring for the team. But then you also have Chandler Stevenson, which personally I think of him as a middle 6 center. Like, I don't think of him as a number 1 center at all. But now here's the thing. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But once you have Jack Eichel now, you have William Karlsson in there as well. What are you going to do with Stevenson? Do you move him to the second line? Maybe move Karlsson down to the third? Like, what do you do with this player? It's such a hard thing, and we'll get to that later on. But very surprised he's up there in points. Then, of course, you have Shea Theodore and Alex Pietrangelo, their two best defensemen, up there in points. 51 points for Theodore, 43 for Pietrangelo. That's fine. Of course, some of them, they actually only missed a handful of games total. Dadonov was up there in points, which was kind of like a big resurgent year for him. Riley Smith has been injured for a while, but he's right there in points with Dadonov. If Smith would have had a full season, he probably would have been in the top 4, maybe even in the top 3 in points. Nicholas Waugh, kind of a surprising year, 38 points for him. Pacioretty missed over half of the games in the entire year, but he was almost point per game, 35 points, 38 games played. If this was one of the big things about this year was injuries. If Pacioretty would have been healthy throughout the entire year, Mark Stone, if you would have had Jack Eichel through the entire year, through those 3 months after the trade, what would this year have looked like? William Karlsson, kind of like a down year for him, 33 points in 66 games, so 0.5 point per game. And we have Mark Stone there. Like I said, he was injured, only 36 games played for him. Yenmark was there, Kolsar. Okay, these start to get to like the mid to low 20s points overall for these guys. Of course, Jack Eichel only played in 33 games this year, 22 points. So after coming back from an injury, that's still pretty solid. Once he gets back to 100%, we recover through the offseason, get a full training camp, get a full preseason, and hopefully find some good line mates to put with him. Because, of course, that's going to be something we'll talk about later on as well. And then you have the under 20 club, or 20 or under club, I should say, with like Howden, Carrier, Amadio, those types of guys that are fourth line guys that are just kind of there, that fill in those lines kind of perfectly. McNabb's there. He was solid through the entire year. Don't really expect too many points out of him. A shocking guy there, Ben Hutton, who they actually signed to an extension. Decent performances out of him. Alex Martinez was missed for, 3/4 or 2/3 of the year ish. Only 25 games played for him. Nolan Patrick, who they expected to be a bigger part of their team, looked to be pretty decent when he was playing, but then, of course, the injury bug hit him for most of the year. So only 25 games played for him. A lot of these guys are call-up guys down here as well, so we're not going to mention them too much. But then on to the goalies. Now, Vegas was probably one of the few teams to only use 3 goalies on the entire year. That being Robin Lehner, Laurent Brossoit, and Logan Thompson. So if we look at these stats, let's start with Logan Thompson. Young player that was been playing in the AHL, worked his way up, earned this spot, actually looked pretty good. 18 games played, 2.6 goals against, a .918 save percentage, 1 shutout on the year, and a record of 9-5-3. Pretty solid for a young goaltender. Coming in, filling some big shoes with their 2 guys ahead of him out of the lineup with injuries. He actually looked good. I can't really say much more. He looked good. Up to Brossoit, though. 24 games played, a 2.9 goals against, a .895 save percentage, 1 shutout for him as well, and a 10-9-3 record on the year. So, for what you want a backup goalie to be, you'd like that goals against to be a little lower and the save percentage to be higher, but for the most part, that's kind of what a backup stats should look like, given that you have a decent goaltender there. So decent job out of him. Lehner, though, only 44 games played for him, a 2.83 goals against, just above a 900 save percentage at .907, 1 shutout for him, and a record of 23-17-2, who was obviously their starting goaltender. So, not that they didn't do well, but Lehner being their starting guy for saying that he deserves more money because his stats are better than a lot of other guys that are signing bigger contracts, and he said it was because of other reasons. It's like, no, you're not. Obviously, he's been a good goaltender. He had a lot of potential. He played with Mark Stone back in the day. But is he that good of a goaltender? Is he a number 1 goaltender in the league? I don't know if he is. I don't know if he's a true starting goaltender. I think he'd only really be a solidified starting goaltender on a middle to bad team. But on Vegas, when you have this high of expectations, you need someone better here. And I don't know who. This is something we'll talk about later too, but I don't know if he's it. I really don't. If you could find somebody that could challenge him for the number 1 spot, like Fleury did, bring out the best of both goaltenders, I feel like that's what you need. Brossoit's not going to do that. Thompson was there filling big shoes, but for next year, it'll probably be Lehner and Brossoit up in the NHL. You need someone else to challenge those guys, and Thompson might be that guy. Maybe he comes in a training camp and looks really good. Maybe you start Brossoit in the AHL. It could happen. If you have Thompson playing hot and versus Lehner who's not performing, you might have a goalie battle there. But for the most part, the goaltenders did look pretty good. So we talked about standings, we talked about team stats, we talked about player stats. So let's talk about next year. So let's take a quick look at draft picks. So they did trade away their first round pick. I don't remember exactly what. This might have been the Jack Eichel trade, actually. So yeah, this was part of the Jack Eichel trade. They do have a second. They have the Rangers third, but they don't have their third. They do not have a fourth. They have 2 fifths, a sixth, and a seventh for this year. Next year, they might have a first, depending on how the picks go, but it's not going to be a top 10 pick, so most likely that pick will go to Buffalo. So next year, they'll have their first. They won't have their second. They'll have their third. Buffalo's third, which there's a whole bunch of conditions with that, so that might change. And then they have their 4th through 7th, all theirs. And then 2024, they have all of their picks there. So they still have most of their picks, so that's obviously really good there. So going into next year, as far as notable people you need to re-sign, there's not much, honestly. There's really not much. There's 2 players that I would try to get under contract if you wanted to keep them both. And only one of them I would say keep if you can get him for a decent price. And that player is going to be Riley Smith. So he is 31 years old. He's making $5 million this year. He's a pending UFA at the end of the year. So he does not have a contract for next year. So hopefully they re-sign him, given that he has such good chemistry with the Misfits line with Carlson and Marsha, so that they keep that line together. But we'll talk about that later, potentially splitting them up. So are you going to be able to afford him? Because it's either going to be him or Dadonov. Basically, you have to get rid of almost one of these contracts somewhere. And I don't think they're going to re-sign Janmark, personally. Unless you can get him for cheaper. But right now he's making $2 million. I don't know how much cap room you have going into next year, but I don't believe you have that much to where you're going to be able to re-sign Smith and Janmark for even similar numbers and still be fine going into next year. But other than that, you have obviously Eichel, you have Stone, Pacioretty, all under big contracts. Carlson's making a lot of money for a lot more years at $5.9 million. Honestly, if Stevenson keeps looking as good as he's been doing, that'd be a really solid possible trade, is to get rid of William Karlsson. If he struggles next year and you feel like you'd be better off without him, I would try to explore the trade market. Now, that is a big trade. He does go till, he has he has 5 more years left at 5.9. So that is a big contract, and you need to clear up some money here regardless. So either you don't re-sign Riley Smith, which I would highly recommend not doing that. You have Brossoit, who was kind of average as a backup goaltender. So again, if he struggles next year, does he start in the AHL? I don't know. But then, of course, you had Logan Tops, who came up and looked really good. What other guys do you have here? Nolan Patrick already has a 2-year contract. He has another year next year, and plus he's still an RFA. Brett Howden, Nicholas Haig, another guy that's kind of irrelevant here. And, of course, a bunch of AHL guys that aren't really relevant right now. And also Nicholas Waugh and Keegan Kolesar. So you don't really have to re-sign many players, especially given if you sign them to like a similar contract to what they're making now. Do you have enough money for it? If not, you're going to have to trade somebody. Now also, you look at a guy like Max Pacioretty making $7 million. He has 1 more year at $7 million. Is he worth it? Because, we'll talk about lines later. So you don't really have to re-sign anyone huge this year. You have Riley Smith and Matthias Janmark as the only 2 things. You already signed Michael Amadio. You signed Braden McNabb to an extension. You signed Ben Hutton to a 2-year extension. You signed Zach Whitecloud to a 6-year extension. As a third-line defenseman, you signed him to a 6-year contract. Really stupid, if you ask me. I understand getting younger players, locked into contracts, but 6 years for a 25-year-old defenseman that's been playing on the third line all year long. You mean to tell me you signed him to a 6-year extension? He goes to the end of, he'll be a UFA at the end of 27-28. So 6 years from now, he'll be a UFA. That's really stupid. McNabb, that's a great extension for them. Give him a little bit more money, 2.85 for 3 years. That's fine for a really solid, reliable defender. That's a great contract for him. Alex Martinez, if he continues getting into injury trouble, maybe thinking about trading him. That would clear up $5.25 million. He's got 2 more years on that contract. Leonard's got 3 more years under that $5 million contract. So you don't really have to do much, but here's the thing. If you encounter a year like this where you have the injury bug, you need that depth in your team. And I don't just mean random guys that could fill in and just be there as a player. Because you have a lot of guys like Nicholas Waugh, Michael Amadio, Keegan Kolsar. Then if we go down here, you know, guys like Nolan Patrick, Brett Howden. Then one of the other guys that came up, Jake Lecision, Jonas Ronberg. Who else we got? Paul Cotter. Like those types of guys that came up and were just kind of like random players you put in the lineup. Like they didn't really do too much. Nothing really stood out as like, oh wow, we got a really good player in him. I mean, maybe that's the role, that they don't really put up a lot of points. They're playmakers and snipers that get the goals and the points, but they just didn't really look that great when we saw them. So maybe try to address that, try to get some more skills, some more some playmaking ability, some goal scoring in the system, so that if someone does go down, like a Mark Stone, like a Max Pacioretty, you could possibly bring up those young guys that are that role and put them in that role instead of throwing them on the 4th line and putting a guy like Michael Amadio on your first line with like Jack Eichel. It just doesn't make sense. So going into next year, this was the big thing, if you ask me. So your lines for next year. Now, I know you want to keep together guys that have good chemistry. But in this case, where you have a guy like Jack Eichel, who is a #1 center in the NHL, and arguably, when he's at his best, one of arguably the top 10 centers in the league, you need him on your first line. Now, you also say that about Mark Stone. Now, yes, he's not a great skater, but he has pretty good puck protection ability, really good defensively, a really solid player overall. Not necessarily going to get like 100 points a year, but is a solid player. So, okay, you have Eichel on your first line. Let's just say you have Stone on your first line. Now, when you have Max Pacioretty up there too, you don't really have any speed other than Eichel. You need someone else that's fast to be on that line. Now, is that where you bring in like a Jonathan Marchessault, a Dadonov, maybe put Stevenson up there, maybe Janmark if you re-sign him, or Riley Smith, or one of those wingers that can skate, that can get behind the defenseman, that has speed. I know we have good chemistry with Pacioretty, Stevenson, and Stone. That's great. But is that enough? Because that's kind of wasting Eichel's ability. Because you have the Misfits line, you have that line. Where does Eichel fit in? He kind of gets the leftovers in that sense, where he has Janmark and Dadonov on his line. Now, maybe you take Janmark off that line, put in somebody else, and you actually have a pretty solid line. But for the most part, the Misfits line arguably should be broken up. I feel like some way, somehow, separate that line, find new chemistry with other players, and then, yeah, maybe if those lines aren't working, maybe then put your Misfits back together and try out some other stuff. But you got to find line mates for Jack Eichel. You got to find out where Stevenson fits in your lineup, and you cannot have Stone and Pacioretty on the same line. Like, the speed isn't there, the playmaking ability isn't really there. And getting a guy like Jack Eichel, for what you got him for, you need to maximize his performance, his youth, his playmaking ability, his goal scoring, his speed, like his everything. You have to utilize that. But we've talked about a lot. What's going to happen next year? What are we going to do in the offseason? I think we're probably going to make at least a couple trades just to try to retool a couple areas of our team. But for the most part, I'm pretty excited. Once we have everyone healthy, we're going to be back and we're going to be better than ever. But that's going to do it for today's video. If you did enjoy, hit that like button down below if you haven't yet. Or if you're brand new here, make sure to subscribe, turn those post notifications on so you never miss an upload. And don't forget, you can always change your mind later. With all that being said, guys, we'll see you in the next one.